So imagine for a second that you've been fasting strictly for physical health.
Okay.
Like you're eating maybe one meal a day just to lower your blood pressure, reduce some medication, that sort of
Very,
thing.
very common.
Yeah. And you decide you want to push it further. You want to hit 36, maybe 48 hours of zero food.
Oh, wow. That's intense.
It is. But then that night, after you cross that 24-hour threshold, you have this incredibly vivid dream.
Okay, I'm listening.
You walk into this room, and sitting right there are two tables.
Hmm.
And on the first table, written out clearly, is the word useless.
Ouch.
Yeah. And on the second table are the words foolish fasting.
Oh, wow.
And you wake up and it just hits you like a physical blow. The intense desire to push the fast further, it wasn't an act of devotion at all. It was an ego trip. It had become entirely useless.
That dream, I mean, it really serves as this profound psychological mirror. And the author of the reflections we're examining today, they actually lived that exact scenario.
Wild.
It really is. They woke up and just immediately stopped trying to push the boundaries of their fast because they realized that an act, wrapped up in the language of discipline had been completely hijacked by personal pride.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because how does a biological health fast turn into this massive spiritual rebuke?
It's a great question.
Today, we are taking a deep dive into a set of really fascinating theological notes based on the book of Mark, chapter 2. And our mission is to explore this deeply personal realization, right? To examine the striking difference between an empty religious routine and a truly meaningful spiritual practice.
Specifically looking at the ancient practice of fasting.
Exactly. And how its underlying mechanisms actually apply to modern Christians today.
Yeah, and to really understand the devastation that the author felt, waking up to that word useless, we have to look at the historical precedent for this exact tension.
Right.
Because the notes focus on a very specific moment in the first century. Jesus is out in public with his disciples, and the crowds just begin to interrogate him.
They want to know why his disciples aren't fasting.
Yes. They're looking at the disciples of the Pharisees and the disciples of John the Baptist who are all fasting, and they're pointing at Jesus' followers, like, what gives?
So the public was essentially walking up to Jesus and demanding to know if his followers were just, I don't know, less serious about God, just because they weren't checking those traditional religious boxes.
Well, the cultural weight of that accusation is just massive.
Right, because fasting was a huge deal.
Huge. In that era, fasting was a highly visible core component of religious identity. The Pharisees, who were the strict religious leaders of the day, they used fasting as this public metric of their devotion.
It was like the gold standard of piety.
Exactly. So
Right.
when the crowd questioned Jesus, they were totally operating under this assumption that visible physical denial was the only valid currency for spiritual seriousness.
I want to challenge that mindset for a second, though, because, we do this exact same thing in modern secular environments all the time.
Well, absolutely. How so?
Well, think about a high-pressure corporate workplace, right? We constantly judge someone's dedication to their job based on whether they stay at the office until midnight every single night.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes.
You see a coworker who leaves at 5 p.m. sharp, and the immediate assumption is, well, they aren't a team player.
Right, they aren't putting in the grind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we completely ignore the possibility that they might just be incredibly efficient and brilliant during their actual working hours.
Meanwhile, the person staying until midnight might just be, scrolling the internet for 4 hours.
Yes. Solely. So the boss sees their car in the parking lot. It's crazy. Why do we consistently equate visible outward suffering with internal dedication?
Honestly, we equate suffering with dedication because suffering is an easily observable metric.
Okay, that makes sense.
You can measure the hours a car sits in a parking lot. You can measure the physical gauntness of a Pharisee who hasn't eaten in 3 days. Humans just have this deep psychological craving for visible metrics.
Because evaluating the actual internal condition of someone's heart or mind, that requires a level of nuance we often just don't possess.
Exactly. The Pharisees had successfully turned a spiritual discipline into a quantifiable performance review.
And if you're constantly measuring your spiritual performance against someone else's visible suffering, you're trapped in a competitive loop.
You are. And what's fascinating here is how Jesus completely dismantled that entire metric system.
Oh, I love this part.
He completely ignored their premise of performance, and instead, he reframed the whole situation using a wedding analogy. He asked the crowd this rhetorical question, basically saying, can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them?
which in the context of a first-century Jewish wedding was a huge deal, right?
It was a multi-day festival of immense joy and abundance. In that environment, fasting would be an outright insult.
You don't wear sackcloth and mourn when the groom is sitting at the head table.
No. You eat, you celebrate, and you participate in the joy of the union. Jesus was declaring that his disciples were celebrating because he, the groom, was physically present with them.
It totally recontextualizes the behavior of the disciples.
Hmm?
The crowds thought they were being lazy or disrespectful to tradition.
Right.
But Jesus points out that the crowd has entirely misread the environment. They're trying to enforce funeral etiquette at a wedding reception.
That's a great way to put it. And then Jesus introduces this critical shift in the narrative. He predicts a time when the groom will be taken away.
Referencing his impending arrest, the crucifixion, his death.
Exactly. He states that when he is physically removed from them, then his disciples will fast, because the emotional and spiritual context of their environment will have fundamentally changed.
Wow. So while he was physically walking alongside them, they had every reason to feast.
Yes.
But after his crucifixion, and eventually after his resurrection and ascension, the dynamic shifts to longing. Fasting then becomes this mechanism for believers to seek his presence while waiting for his return.
That is the crucial pivot. Fasting, in this theological framework, is never just some isolated outward religious activity. It is a direct, responsive reflection of a person's relationship with Christ.
So if the relational longing isn't the driving force, the action degrades into nothing more than a hungry person putting on a theatrical performance for the crowd.
Precisely. And that shift in context Jesus described, it creates a framework for how all spiritual practices are meant to operate. And we see the danger of losing that framework in modern Christian practices all the time.
Yeah, how do you keep meaningful spiritual disciplines from decaying into just dead routines?
Well, let's look at baptism. The reflection we're analyzing points out that baptism is designed as this incredibly potent visual metaphor.
Right. When a person is immersed in the water, it physically pictures dying and rising with Christ.
Yes, it's a symbol of leaving an old life behind and beginning anew. But, as the source notes, if a person is baptized repeatedly without actually grasping that underlying meaning,
The spiritual significance just evaporates.
entirely. People often seek repeated baptisms because they're chasing a physiological or emotional high. They operate under this assumption that the outward physical act of being submerged in water will somehow generate an internal spiritual transformation.
But if the cognitive and relational understanding of the symbol is absent, the person is basically just getting wet.
The ritual has been entirely hollowed out.
And we see the exact same decay happen with communion, too. If communion is taken every single week or even every day without immense intentionality, it devolves from a sacred act into an automatic routine.
The notes emphasize that communion must actively prompt a believer to do 4 specific things. They have to remember the gospel, confess their sins, give thanks, and deeply examine their personal relationship with the Lord.
So if those cognitive and spiritual gears aren't turning, the practice is functionally useless.
Yes.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me, because this decay of meaning isn't just a religious phenomenon. It is deeply embedded in human neurology.
Oh, really?
How
That-
so? There's this psychological concept called semantic satiation. Have you heard of this?
Vaguely, but refresh my memory.
Okay, so if you take a completely normal word like door, and you repeat it out loud 20 or 30 times in a row, it rapidly loses all its meaning.
Oh, yeah. It just sounds like nonsense after a while.
Exactly. Your brain stops recognizing the concept of a door and just registers a weird, hollow sound vibrating in your mouth. Thoughtless repetition physically strips the meaning away from the action.
Wow. Applying the mechanics of semantic satiation to a ritual like communion perfectly explains the danger of an empty habit.
Right.
When a believer engages in those 4 steps outlined by the author, remembering, confessing, thanking, and examining, they are essentially forcing a circuit breaker into that loop of semantic satiation.
Because deeply examining one's relationship with God requires present-moment cognitive load.
It demands that the brain and the heart actively engage with the material, preventing the ritual from becoming just a hollow sound.
You can see this happen in romantic relationships, too. Think about going through the motions with a partner. You ask, "How was your day?" every single evening, but you aren't actually listening to their response.
You're just waiting for your turn to talk, or just nodding along.
Yeah, or you kiss them on the cheek before you leave for work, but it's pure muscle memory. You schedule a date night, but you both sit at the table just scrolling on your phones.
So true.
From the outside, a passerby would look at that and say, Look, they're doing relationship things. They're checking the boxes.
But the heart is entirely gone.
The outward action remains intact, while the internal reality is totally bankrupt.
And if the outward actions of a vibrant relationship and a dead relationship can look identical to an observer, well, evaluating our own spiritual disciplines requires intense self-honesty.
Which is really hard to do.
It is. But to help with that evaluation, the author provides a really stark framework regarding what fasting is not. And this framework serves as a diagnostic tool to expose those empty habits.
The diagnostic list is pretty blunt. Fasting is not a diet plan to lose weight.
Right.
It is not a performance designed to impress other people with your piety. It is not a scout badge you earn to feel morally superior to the person sitting next to you.
And perhaps the most dangerous trap of all, fasting is not a spiritual bargain.
Okay, explain the spiritual bargain, because I think a lot of people fall into this.
It's a very pervasive psychological trap. It is the belief that by intentionally denying ourselves food, we are manufacturing leverage with God.
Like we're twisting his arm.
Exactly. We think that if we generate enough visible suffering, we can obligate God to answer our prayers. It reduces the divine to a vending machine where the currency is our own hunger.
I put 48 hours of physical suffering into the machine. Now you dispense the blessing I selected.
Precisely. And this loops us all the way back to the author's vivid dream at the very beginning of our deep dive.
Oh, right, the 2 tables.
Yes. Why were the tables labeled useless and foolish fasting? Because the author had unwittingly slipped into that exact bargaining mindset.
The drive to push the fast to 36 or 48 hours had ceased to be about seeking Christ.
It had morphed into an extreme physical endurance test. It was a metric to conquer.
The practice became foolish because the underlying motive was hijacked by the ego's need to achieve a really difficult goal.
Exactly.
Wait, I'm getting stuck on this, though. If fasting isn't an endurance test, and it's not a spiritual bargain to gain leverage, what exactly is the mechanism here?
What do you mean?
Like, how does the simple biological state of being hungry actually draw someone closer to God? I need to understand the how behind this.
Okay, that's a great point. The mechanism really relies on redirecting a biological alarm bell. The author posits that the primary function of physical hunger during a fast is to serve as a relentless reminder of our complete dependence.
Okay, dependence on what?
On God. Every time the stomach growls, it is a physiological signal that humans are fragile, contingent creatures who simply cannot sustain themselves.
So fasting takes that primal biological drive for physical sustenance and intentionally redirects it upward.
It forces the realization that a person's deepest, most vital need isn't physical food, but the sustaining presence of the Lord himself.
So the hunger pang itself becomes the prompt for the spiritual discipline.
Yes.
Instead of answering the alarm bell with a sandwich, you answer it with a recalibration of your focus. You answer it by turning to Christ.
And the notes point out the hidden practical mechanics of how this works in daily life, too. When you eliminate the time spent planning meals, prepping food, eating, and cleaning up, you suddenly unearth a significant pocket of newly created time.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, the physical act of fasting carves out the literal space needed for deep prayer, reading the Bible, repentance, and worship. You are bringing your actual raw desires before God and asking for your motives to be purified.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we uncover the most profound psychological insight in this entire theological reflection. Fasting is not merely about the addition of time for prayer.
No, it's not.
It is fundamentally an act of revelation. The reflection argues that fasting aggressively reveals the things that control us.
It strips away the coping mechanisms.
Exactly. It removes the anesthetic. Food is one of our primary tools for soothing stress, masking anxiety, and buffering our emotions.
Oh, without a doubt.
When you remove that physical comfort, whatever is lurking beneath the surface immediately bubbles up. The author notes that fasting exposes our hidden dependencies on comfort.
It reveals our addiction to pleasure, our unexamined fears, our deep-seated pride, and honestly, our desperate need for human approval.
When you are hungry and highly irritable, you lose the energy required to mask your flaws. The irritability wasn't created by the fast.
No, the irritability was always there.
The fast just removed the buffer that was hiding it.
That is the exact mechanism of revelation. The fast forces you to confront the reality of your own heart. It proves that fasting is never primarily about the food being given up. The length of time, whether it's skipping a single meal or fasting for a full day, is entirely secondary to the posture of the heart. The true intended purpose is the pursuit of the presence of Christ and the establishment of a living, active communion with him.
So the modern application for Christians is to utilize these disciplines relentlessly to maintain focus on Jesus, actively resisting that gravitational pull toward empty ritual.
Every single spiritual discipline discussed in these reflections, whether that's fasting, prayer, reading the Bible, engaging in worship, baptism, or communion, shares the exact same ultimate mandate.
They must lead the practitioner to Christ rather than leading to an inflated sense of personal pride.
They are tools. Much like the guests at the wedding in Jesus' analogy, these disciplines are meant to help a person remember grace, depend on divine strength, and rejoice in the presence of the groom.
The author urges that when believers engage in these practices, they must be executed with deep wisdom, profound humility, and genuine faith.
Always guarding against the trap of that performance metric.
So what does this all mean for you, listening right now? According to the theological framework we've explored today, the ultimate goal of stripping away excess and pushing back against empty routines is the realization that Jesus is meant to be true nourishment.
Beautifully said.
The reflection asserts that he is meant to be lasting peace and the absolute greatest treasure, not a chart you fill out,
Definitely not.
not a daily habit you mindlessly repeat just to feel morally secure,
Yeah.
but a living reality to be sought above all physical comforts.
We've established that the mechanism of fasting works by physically stripping away our primary comfort, specifically to reveal the hidden things that truly control us, our pride, our buried fears, or our reliance on external approval.
Right.
But if we take this core principle of intentional giving up and apply it beyond just food, it opens up a massive frontier for self-examination.
Okay, where are you going with this?
Well, consider this. What would happen if you applied this mechanism to other areas of your modern hyper-comfortable life?
Oh.
If you dare to intentionally pause your most automatic daily routines, whether that's your constant social media scrolling, your need for constant background noise, or your compulsive online shopping, what hidden controlling dependencies might you uncover about yourself?
It really makes you wonder what kind of actual hunger is hiding right underneath all that noise.
Indeed, it does.